Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary No, for being here. Just over a year ago, President Trump took office. At the time he did so, he came in with a significant mandate or set of mandates. One of those mandates included the task of having to address a veritable tidal wave of illegal immigration that had occurred during the 4-year period between 2021 and 2025. A period of time in which an unknown number of people entered the United States borders unlawfully. Some have said it's maybe 10 or 15 million. Some have said it's more. It's difficult to ascertain. But what we do know is that many of those same people who were encouraging those things at that time are the same people who are now opposing President Trump and his efforts and your efforts and those of your department to remove those individuals. That was part of his mandate, clean up the mess. Now, under ordinary circumstances, I would think that when there are laws of the United States that have been broken, most or all members of this body, if asked, should those who have violated the law in coming to our country be returned to their own countries? I would think we'd all be able to raise our hands in support of that. We had doubt cast on that last week during the President's State of the Union address, when President Trump made the point, quote, the first duty of the American government is to protect American citizens, not illegal aliens. He asked those of us who agreed with him to stand. And stunningly, a whole lot of my colleagues and a lot of our counterparts on the House of Representatives side declined to stand, refused to stand. These things are not without consequence. Illegal immigration is not something that poses no risk to the American people, to the security of the homeland, to the safety of individual families. It brings tremendous risk, and we've felt that. Some families represented here have felt that all too personally, and my heart goes out to each of them. We also face another threat as we approach another election this fall, a threat that, due to a ripple in existing federal law under the National Voter Registration Act, it's stunningly easy for someone in almost any state of the union to walk into a DMV, fill out a form to apply for a driver's license, which you can do as a non-citizen in almost any state. And by merely checking a box and signing your name, you can register to vote, including to vote in a federal election, even though existing law prohibits anyone who is not a citizen from voting in a U.S. federal election. It's phenomenally easy to do so if they follow this stunning formula. That's why I've proposed the Save America Act, which would make sure that we have the tools necessary to protect your vote. Because anytime someone casts a vote in a federal election who is not an American citizen, it's taking away your vote. It's taking something that doesn't belong to them and that belongs to you uniquely as an American citizen. Yes, stunningly, some of the same people who were condemning you and condemning President Trump for trying to clean up the mess that President Biden created over a 4-year period of time are also the people most staunch, most dogged, most dug in their opposition to this very simple reform to make sure that those showing up to vote are entitled to vote. You know, you have to show your credentials in all sorts of circumstances: when boarding a plane, when applying for Social Security benefits, applying for a passport, when starting any new job for a new employer. You have to prove your identity, who you are, and that you're entitled to do that thing. You've got to demonstrate that you are entitled to do the thing that you're going to do. But it's not just government that requires these. When you pick up a prescription at a pharmacy, when you go to the doctor, when you're admitted to a hospital, when you board an airplane, when you pick up airplane tickets, when you go to the Super Bowl, the Emmys, the Grammys, the Oscars, or even the Democratic National Convention, where, yes, photo ID and credentials are required or you can't get in. You see, because the Democratic National Convention understands that when people participate at that event who are not entitled to, they're taking something from someone else who does have that right, and that is wrong. Meanwhile, many of those same individuals who publicly cheered and advocated for President Biden as he was distorting various immigration laws, including the use of immigration parole, which requires an individualized determination in order to admit somebody into this country, President Biden used it categorically to bring in millions of people. With respect to our asylum laws, he just opened the floodgates and started treating people as if they were asylees just for having submitted an asylum application, then let them off into the interior of the United States saying, we hope one day you will show up to your immigration hearing where you'll have an individualized determination. And by the way, that immigration hearing might be many years or even decades into the future. So the same people who were applauding that are now condemning you and condemning President Trump for just trying to enforce the law. And those very same people today want your department, the entirety of it, to remain shut down, to remain defunded. Secretary Noem, tell me how that is affecting your operations within the department. Either your operations, your ability to protect the American homeland from those who have come here illegally or otherwise. How is that harming the families of those who work in your department, and how is that harming the American people and undermining their safety?
The patriots that work at the Department of Homeland Security still get up every day and do their jobs and work hard to protect the American people. There's individuals in some of our departments, though, that have been furloughed. That it's not an option for them to come in, and they're not getting paychecks. They're not able to pay their rent, put food on the table for their kids. Our cybersecurity agency has lost hundreds of workers that have been furloughed. We've got weapons of mass destruction that does training for detecting bombs and terrorist activities across the country and works with our local law enforcement, has been furloughed and is not on duty today. We have ICE and CBP and officers at Secret Service and some Coast Guard elements that are still there and are essential employees that are showing up and doing their jobs, but their support staff isn't able to work, and their contracting isn't getting done, and their management practices aren't getting done, and those families are struggling. Many of these TSOs at TSA that are running these security checkpoints are borrowing money so that they can get through a short period here without paychecks, but they just got through one of those, and they're still in debt from paying the fines and penalties for late bills. So we are damaging families to make a political point, that the Democratic Party is damaging families long-term to make a political point when it has no effect on what we're able to do for immigration enforcement out there every single day, because that agency is funded.
Now, you've heard from some of those same colleagues of mine today on this stand that they're negotiating, that they've made their offer, that they've made it fairly easy for us to fund your department with their conditions. Tell us about those conditions and how those would affect you.
Honestly, I don't understand what their conditions are at this point. One of the discussions that we had was body cameras. I've already instituted body cameras. They're being utilized on our law enforcement officers. They need to be funded. That is something that Congress has not given us the tools to do that. They talk about masks, yet they're the party that in 2020 mandated masks and penalized and put crimes on U.S. citizens if they didn't have a mask on. And now they don't want our law enforcement officers to be protected from doxing and from threats where people have threatened their families and come after them for just doing their jobs.
And that, to be sure, is why they don't want them wearing masks, right? They want to be able to dox them?
They want to be able to dox them and to dox their identities and have them be bullied, threatened, and potentially victimized by people out there who don't support them upholding the law.
Merely for doing their job.
Correct.
Doing their job, which means enforcing the law. Now, who in this room would not want the U.S. government doing its job enforcing the law and sending people back to their home country if they came here illegally? I can't imagine why somebody would not want that. It's stunning to me that particularly during a time like this, they'd want to carry out that kind of shutdown operation. Now, tell me this. Over the last few days, we've had a few new developments on the world stage and domestically with what happened over the weekend in Austin and with what happened on the other side of the world over the weekend. Tell me how that has uniquely intensified the effects of the now 2.5-week-old shutdown of the Department of Homeland Security, which has been shut down a couple of times now in the last 5 or 6 months.
We have known and suspected terrorists in this country that we don't know where they are. We have always faced threats here on our homeland, and that is our department's duty, is to do all that we can to protect the American people. But when we have conflicts overseas, we see that the ramifications are higher threats here at home as well. And more resources are needed to be out there to do due diligence, to try to do everything we can to prevent any kind of attack on our homeland against our American citizens.
If we're going to be a country and if we're going to be a safe country, we've got to fund the Department of Homeland Security. We should focus on nothing else until that's done. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Before I call on Senator Padilla, I expect DHS, just like any other executive branch agency, to comply with all lawful court orders. That's why we have an independent judiciary. All local and state law enforcement ought to support their federal law enforcement partners. Our laws need to be followed, even in instances where officials might disagree with them. We have this public safety issue because previous administration refused to enforce our immigration laws. The previous administration let millions of illegal immigrants without proper vetting and creating a humanitarian crisis at the border. President Trump and his administration have acted swiftly to address the crisis and with great success. Senator